Welcome to the Let's Stay Healthy radio show, sponsored and brought to you by Montana Harvest Natural Food Store in Billings, Montana. If you don't spend time on your wellness, you're going to be forced to spend time on your illness. Your health is your most valuable asset. Invest in it by tuning in now.
Welcome everybody to Let's Stay Healthy. Michael Ray here with you from Montana Harvest. I'm here with Kimmy Oliver from Montana Harvest also. And today we have a special guest on with us, Rachel Kilroy, Senior Director from Solar. She's representing Better Being, and she's going to be talking about the DAO enzymes. And so we're excited to have her on. Welcome aboard. Looking forward to everything you're going to show us, teach us, and train us in. And we're excited to have you on.
Thanks for having me today. Great to be here.
And so you're the creator for all of Better Being products.
Yeah, I'm the director of all the innovation. So any new product that comes out at Better Being, which includes brands like Solar, Zao Nutrition, Cal, Heritage Store, I'm kind of in charge of more of the concepting and kind of choosing the raw materials and building out the formulas with my amazing team. So I think I have the greatest job in the company personally. But
well, that's an exciting job.
Yeah, exactly.
You must be pretty busy.
I am very busy, very busy.
And you guys have launched some awesome, amazing new items. And one of them is relatively new that we brought in, I don't know, maybe a few months ago, the Solar DAO enzyme.
Yeah. This is a product I've wanted to launch for close to a decade, to be honest with you. And there were just no U.S. suppliers. They were all out of Europe for this particular enzyme. And a couple years ago, they finally brought distribution to the U.S. And so it's also kind of timed really interestingly with a rise in research in a lot of particular areas of focus. And so there's been a lot of demand sort of creeping up over the years. And so we sort of knew when we launched this that it was going to be a big, exciting kind of hit with a lot of interest, and it has been. So I'm excited to talk about it a little further. I know a lot of people don't really know what this enzyme is and what it does. So that's sort of what we're here to talk about today.
Well, that's our first question is, what exactly is this enzyme and how does it affect histamine?
Yeah, so the enzyme itself, DAO, it stands for diamine oxidase. And it's one of two enzymes that are basically responsible for breaking down histamine in the body. And to back up a little, histamine is a natural chemical in your body, and it acts as a signaling molecule both for the immune and the nervous system. And it's primarily known for its role in allergic and inflammatory responses, but it also helps regulate important functions like digestion and your sleep-wake cycle. And so histamine breakdown, before we get into that, we can talk about mast cells a little bit as well. So a mast cell is a type of white blood cell. And it's the primary immune cell that stores and releases histamine. And it's found throughout the body's connective tissues, particularly in your blood vessels, nerves, your lungs, and your intestines. And so that's kind of the little 101 basics. Now let's talk about the two different types of enzymes that break down histamine. One is called HNMT, histamine N-methyltransferase. And this enzyme breaks down the histamine inside your body's cells. The other, the DAO, the one we're here to talk about today, it is produced mainly in the mucosal epithelial cells of the small intestine, and it is responsible for breaking down histamine that enters the body from the outside, primarily through food. DAO also, has histamine not just from food, but also there's histamine from our gut microbiota. So some of your gut microbiota can also produce histamine. And also as they sort of ferment certain types of foods in the gut, they can also produce histamine as part of that breakdown process. And so the role of DAO is primarily to break down that histamine from food, from the bacteria, to prevent it from entering into your bloodstream. So you kind of think of it as like your defensive line, right? They're there to kind of prevent all of this histamine from getting into your bloodstream, which is where the other enzyme HMNT would come into play. So that's its primary function. Now, let's talk about a little bit about histamine's function in the body, and we can kind of get back to the importance of DAO. So, histamine functions in the body. It's involved in your immune response. Obviously, during an allergic reaction, your immune cells, the mast cells that we talked about, and your basophils, they release histamine in response to an allergen. And this would kind of trigger the symptoms we think of when you have like an allergic reaction, some redness or itching, sometimes the swelling in the eyes and the nose. There's also impact on your digestive system. Histamine stimulates stomach cells to produce gastric acid, which is obviously essential for breaking down food. It's involved in brain function. It acts as a neurotransmitter in the brain, where it helps to regulate things like alertness and appetite and your sleep wake cycle. It involves your thyroid. It can influence the synthesis and the release of your thyroid hormones. It's involved in your stress response, which is a big one. Stress hormones activate mast cells. And so when activated by stress, your mast cells degranulate. It's a term you might hear. It releases a flood of histamine and other inflammatory molecules into your bloodstream. It's also involved in hormone balance, which is a really important one. It impacts hormone balance primarily through its intricate two-way relationship with estrogen and with progesterone. So some of the things that histamine does. Now, what happens when you have a DAO sort of deficiency, which certain populations do have, is that there's not enough DAO to prevent all of that histamine from entering into the bloodstream. And your body can only make so much HMNT every single day, right? So it's already dealing with histamine in the system. So if you don't have enough DAO to break down this new histamine that's entering the body from the food or from your bacteria, it can sort of just flood the system with histamine, right? And kind of aggravate and exasperate, sometimes for people who are already having these reactions and already have a lot of histamine and they're dealing with a response in their system. And there is a lot of different reasons why someone might have a DAO deficiency. There's definitely a genetic component for underlying conditions. So we know that certain people have genetic disorders that would cause a histamine accumulation. And it's often sometimes referred to as histamine intolerance. We've probably heard that term in the last few months, right? And this can trigger the symptoms that are sort of similar to an allergic reaction for some people. And what most people who struggle with histamine intolerance deal with is gastrointestinal issues like bloating, abdominal pain, cramping, and diarrhea. Very notably, skin problems like hives and itching and flushing and eczema, kind of like reactions. And neurological symptoms, often headaches and migraines. Cardiovascular, sometimes you see some people dealing with hypotension issues. And then the respiratory issues, the nasal congestion, and some of the things that we would kind of associate with like an allergy response, right? And so there's a lot of reasons why you might have an underlying issue with DAO. What's really interesting about it is that around 80% of people affected by histamine intolerance are actually female. And so this is something that we found kind of really interesting as we've looked into all of the clinical research, is how much this really impacts women. Also, there are certain medications that will interfere with DAO. We know nonsteroidal anti-inflammatory medications, proton pump inhibitors for GERD, some antidepressants, some blood pressure medications, all might interfere with the DAO activity in the body. But yeah, like I said, the big interesting thing that we sort of discovered was that it really impacts females much more dramatically than it impacts males.
That's interesting. And women are more prone to thyroid issues, and thyroid and liver are tied together, but so is histamine levels and liver, because your liver is where most of histamine gets neutralized and cleared from your bloodstream. So wouldn't you agree that somebody who's struggling with high histamine levels and they're not producing enough of the enzymes to help clear it out and neutralize it, that they also would have a liver issue?
Yeah, and that's the thing that's so interesting is how systemic, the overload of histamine can really be for some people. And it's a new area of focus. I mean, I don't think histamine intolerance is considered an actual disorder. It's sort of a term that's been recently coined. And there's people that are sort of specializing in very specific areas of focus around histamine, but it's all emerging science. But we can get into some of the issues with why it impacts women the most, and especially women in perimenopausal age. That seems to be the real target demographic. So DAO and the menstrual cycle has a kind of specific relationship, if you will. DAO's enzyme activity fluctuates with the menstrual cycle, and it's generally being higher during your luteal phase and lower during your actual menstrual period. Estrogen influences this relationship by stimulating mast cells to release histamine while simultaneously suppressing DAO activity. And it leads to this vicious cycle of increased histamine and estrogen, which isn't a problem for some people, but for other groups and other sort of people in certain demographics, it can certainly be an issue. So during the premenstrual phase, estrogen levels will drop and progesterone levels drop, which can lead to a decreased diamine oxidase, your DAO enzyme activity. And it results in increased histamine levels, and potentially it can worsen symptoms associated with PMS and menstrual cramps as well. And so like when we get into the perimenopausal years, as you kind of know, that's the years where our estrogen and our progesterone are on this crazy wild ride. So what we sort of know is that estrogen increases histamine, and progesterone, in contrast, has a mitigating effect on histamine and your mast cell activity. And this is why some women experienced increased histamine problems like the headaches and the bloating and skin issues and things like that associated with histamine intolerance at times when estrogen levels peak. And of childbearing age women, that's usually kind of around just before ovulation and menstruation. In perimenopause, high estrogen levels can trigger that release of histamine from mast cells. Your progesterone at this time is on a very steep decline between the late 30s into maybe around 52-ish or so, which is the average age of menopause. And estrogen kind of fluctuates up and down. So there's some months for perimenopausal age women where that estrogen might be really high, and then other months where it's really, really low. It's on what we kind of call a sort of roller coaster ride, if you will. And so that fluctuation, that unpredictability, can kind of cause like a hormonal chaos, if you will, where the increased histamine released from the fluctuating estrogen combined with that decreased progesterone can lead to a less effective histamine breakdown. And so it's really during these years that you see a lot of women struggle the most, especially in their 40s. And I am actually one of those people. So I actually have an autoimmune disorder called mast cell activation syndrome. And I all of a sudden found myself in my 40s, not being able to eat a whole slew of foods that I used to be able to eat. And, never understanding why I would break out in these hives for no reason, at various times during my cycle. And it very much was cyclical, as I've sort of learned. And so, this project has been very near and dear to my heart, because I am somebody who kind of has been in this cycle. It's this relationship between your estrogen levels and your progesterone levels. They have to be in a balance, and perimenopause, those two hormones are just all over the place. And so what's really interesting is that when women go through menopause and they hit perimenopause, it's interesting that their DAO levels often increase and kind of go back to normal, which is really wild to think about. So it tends to impact that sort of time frame more so than any other time. Pregnancy is another time where your DAO activity will also significantly increase, especially around the second to third month. So there's definitely a role there too, and it can sort of shift things, but nobody, I think, really experiences the most issues with histamine any more than the folks that are in that perimenopausal age bracket.
I have a question for you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Talk about how the cofactors for nutritional support help people balance this out, and then also dietary sources and supplements that will help people maintain, more balance in their histamine levels.
Yeah, so copper is really important. Your vitamin B6 is really important. Your vitamin C is really important. Molybdenum is another trace mineral that doesn't get talked about enough, but it's definitely a building block for your DAO enzyme. Um, and so nutritionally, those are some really great, basic building block ingredients. So a good multi, or a good multi and maybe a good mineral supplement should cover most of your needs there. And not all multis would have copper. So I think that's the one to kind of look out for. Copper has a lot of contraindications with things like chemo and lots of different medications. So it's always one you need to double check. But a lot of multivitamins don't include copper for that reason. So it's something to just kind of look for.
What about zinc? Because zinc and the liver are extremely important.
Yeah, I mean, all of those minerals are so
Okay.
important to the function of the production of chemicals and neurotransmitters in our body and all of these different things. I could go on and on about minerals and trace minerals. We try to put trace minerals in a lot of different products because we know they're so depleted from our soil and our food supply these days. So definitely important. One of the other things that I have personally found really interesting is the relationship between DAO and melatonin. So there's an inverse connection between the two. DAO degrades histamine and it breaks down excess extracellular histamine in the body, particularly in the gut. But melatonin actually suppresses histamine release and it helps to
Wow.
regulate your circadian rhythm and your sleep cycle. And it influences histamine by binding to receptors on your mast cells. So high histamine will disrupt your sleep. Elevated histamine levels promote wakefulness, and they can lead to symptoms like early awakening insomnia, where you wake up in the middle of the night and you can't get back to sleep. And as I mentioned, histamine is also heavily tied to stress, right? So there is that sort of kind of, again, systemic kind of interplay with histamine there where if you're really stressed out and you're producing a lot of stress chemicals, you're also producing a lot of histamine. So even if you're not somebody who struggles with the histamine intolerance issues, it could still have a pretty big impact on your sleep, because if you already have a lot of histamine in your system and then you're eating foods with a lot of histamine, you're just kind of contributing more and more to that buildup. But really, I think the research that's the most interesting is that there's specific research that's been ongoing, a lot of it outside of the US, that's given a lot of press and attention to DAO. And it's a lot of, again, kind of disorders and things that impact women. I preface that by saying it's all very early research, clinical trials done in very small populations. So I'd say it's more emerging science than like statistically relevant science. However, there's ongoing research for people with PCOS. They produce too much estrogen and kind of have lower levels of progesterone. So there's been a lot of interest within the PCOS communities for DAO enzyme. There's been a lot of interest in endometriosis communities and some research there because high levels of estrogen in endometriosis can also lower DAO activity, which can increase histamine. There's some early research into premenstrual dysphoric disorder, PMDD, for people who have really intense, basically PMS symptoms. And they believe that the DAO enzyme might be involved in that histamine cycle that would exacerbate those symptoms. The other one that's really interesting is that the AOC1 gene, which is the genetic gene that produces the DAO enzyme, is also the same gene that's linked to a lot of autoimmune disorders like Hashimoto's, mast cell activation syndrome. They've been looking at things like IBD and rheumatoid arthritis. There's also a look into connective tissue disorders like Ehlers-Danlos, because there are a lot of mast cells in your connective tissue. And there's a lot of people specifically that struggle with things like Ehlers-Danlos that seem to also have histamine intolerance issues. In terms of nervous system issues, POTS, postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome, is another area where there's been some research. Fibromyalgia, genetic variants of the AOC1 gene, which codes for the DAO enzyme, are highly prevalent in women with fibromyalgia. And there's even some ongoing research with multiple sclerosis. Research has kind of found that lower levels of histamine and DAO enzyme in the serum of people with relapsing remitting MS. So again, all very new emerging science done at smaller clinical size, in terms of the size of the trials, but interesting. And that has certainly got the attention of a lot of people who are already struggling with these disorders. A lot of naturopathic doctors, a lot of practitioners have been recommending DAO based on some of this research. And that's sort of where a lot of the buzz behind this enzyme has actually been coming from, is people seeing some of this early research or hearing about it or being recommended to take DAO enzyme from, a practitioner of some sort. And so that's kind of what we're seeing, is why people are looking for it, and what brought them to DAO and how they heard about it is through a lot of that ongoing research. So it's really interesting stuff. And there's a lot more to come, I think, over the next handful of years. So it'll be exciting to see where all that science goes.
Well, I thought it was interesting when you said that about the diet, because or the stress, right? And how it's tied when you're really stressed, and then your low levels of DAO and then higher amounts of histamine. Well, we all know that when your body's under stress or in fight or flight mode, that your digestion is the first thing to stop. And so I think that is a huge connection. If you are super stressed all the time, of course, your digestion is going to be affected. But also there's a huge connection because of gut health and your microbiome, and that there might be an imbalance. And I'm a big fan of your guys' microbiome probiotics. And so introducing a probiotic could also hopefully be beneficial along with the DAO enzyme to help lower the histamine levels. But we're big fans of getting to the underlying issue, like what's the main cause? And then what foods are you eating that are contributing to high histamine levels? Could you go over maybe some foods that can trigger higher amounts of histamine?
The hard thing with that is that a lot of them are what we would generally consider healthy food. That's the part that's such a struggle, is that histamine is found in high concentration in fermented and aged foods. So things like cheeses, like your sauerkrauts and your kimchis, and any of your kind of processed and cured meats, alcohol, wine, right? Any fermented alcohol. But it's also found in a lot of foods that you would kind of think of as being really healthy, like avocados and spinach, eggplant, tomatoes, a lot of legumes like soy, for instance. And so it's kind of a broad range of food. We know that people who struggle with histamine issues generally should avoid alcohol. We know caffeine, especially green tea. Green tea can be really tough and can really inhibit that DAO activity quite a bit. So again, you could be eating almonds and spinach and avocados and fermented foods and think that you're eating all of these wonderfully healthy, gut healthy foods, and it actually can kind of not be great for some kind of groups of people. And so, and with bacteria, there are some lactobacillus bacteria and some of the main bacteria that we would normally associate with a healthy gut that most people would want to take, that for certain segments of the population that struggle, maybe not so much, right? There's certain lactobacillus, certain bifidobacteria that they might have to be cautious with, depending on what issues they might have underlying. So it's really interesting. I do know like the spore forming bacteria are pretty safe for people with histamine struggles, and like the soil based, bacteria organisms, those are usually really safe for people, generally speaking, that struggle with histamine issues.
Yeah, that's a good tip. Because you would have thought that there are specific probiotics that could ignite that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, some other kind of fun research we've seen has been with migraines for sure. There's definitely a good look at migraines and the role of histamine in the actual reaction of a migraine. Um, and also, even funnily enough, with alcohol, there's actually quite a bit of research out there that for hangovers with DAO, surprisingly, and for folks that get the red cheeks, the flush when they drink alcohol, it sometimes is referred to as Asian flush because there's a large number of Asian populations that struggle and will get those red cheeks. And I know that there's actually a pretty good amount of research out there looking at DAO and also just with a hangover in general, because um, there's a lot of histamine produced when you drink alcohol. It's toxic to the system, right? So I know there's some smaller research out there that shows if you take it like before you drink alcohol that it can help with that reaction. So again, limited evidence, but worth mentioning and pointing out. So
Yeah, I had a question. So I was
yeah.
kind of wondering how this works. Is the pork kidney extracts? How does that?
Yeah.
Can you explain that because it's kind of interesting?
Yeah, so you can source DAO from plants. It is, even though it is an enzyme that we humans produce, it's also an enzyme produced in certain plants. And then also it's found in certain animals. And so our Solar A supplement is derived from a pea sprout, is where we source the DAO, just because we wanted it to hit the vegan, kosher, halal, and kind of all the buckets. But a lot of the extracts, the DAO enzyme out there is from pork, porcine. So certainly it can come from some of the extracts from either pork or bovine from cow. So
Anyway, I thought that was kind of interesting that
yeah,
it comes from that because normally people will gravitate more to the vegan stuff and
sure,
routes and
yeah.
stuff.
And they both are equally effective. The way that the enzyme is measured in terms of its enzyme activity, if you look on a label, it looks at histamine degrading units. And so that's the measurement of activity. The Solar A product is 60,000 histamine degrading units. So that's the enzyme activity. It is something to point out because there are quite a few in the marketplace that are only 15 or 30,000 histamine degrading units. So you get, not quite as high of a potency. And then the other thing is that it's pretty sort of unstable. It's a very delicate, if you will, enzyme. And so the Solar A product, we put it in an enteric protected capsule. And what that means is it's a capsule where the enzyme itself is not meant to be broken down in the stomach with the gastric acid and everything. It'll survive stomach acid, and then it won't open up until it reaches the small intestine, which is where you want this enzyme to be. So it is an enteric protected, and we test to make sure that those capsules will not open up in the stomach, that they will survive stomach acid. We do all kinds of lab testing to ensure that, so that we know that DAO enzyme is getting into the small intestine where it needs to be. So that's definitely something to look for when you buy a DAO product, is you definitely want to make sure it has that enzyme, that enteric protection. Otherwise, it just may not survive stomach acid and it may not be as efficacious as you'd hope. So,
And how does somebody take a DAO enzyme? Is it with food, without food?
yeah, so it's generally, if you look at the human clinical studies that were done for gut health and a lot of the research, they were actually having folks take it kind of right before or right at the beginning of a meal. I can tell you a lot of people also will take it, when they don't eat, just if they're kind of dealing with ongoing kind of histamine related issues, they will also sometimes take them without a meal. But you can take it, 3 times a day with every meal of the day. And I've had people ask me too about taking it alongside, your traditional antihistamines, your H1, your H2 blockers. And there's no reason why you can't take both. I get a lot of feedback from people who take this, from consumers, from other folks out there who actually say that the combination has been game changer for them. People who just struggle a lot with both environmental allergic responses and food related issues, there are people out there that will actually just take both. So there's no contraindications there, or really with any other medications that I'm aware of. So it's very safe. Um,
How does somebody test for their histamine levels?
with a doctor, obviously, and it would
Mhm.
probably require blood work. I know that the genetic testing to see if you have the AOC1 gene variant is available most of the time. Obviously, your insurance probably isn't going to cover that type of genetic testing, but it is available out there. There are a lot of test kits that will test for you. You kind of do some basic blood work with most of them.
Okay. But if it's safe to say that if you didn't want to have that blood test done and you have a lot of the symptoms linked to high histamine levels, that trying a DAO enzyme isn't going to hurt anybody.
Exactly. In the same way that you could take any other sort of digestive enzymes with a meal, and a lot of people will find benefit from them without necessarily going and having all of the enzyme activity in their body tested.
Yeah,
So
that's exciting.
yeah, so it's just
Oh,
a kind of really exciting new and entry into the enzyme space. It's kind of totally different than most other enzymes what we've seen. So yeah, there's really nothing else like it on the market. There's a lot of herbs I think people have taken through the years. I know things like nettle, right? And some of these different plants that we know help with histamine. They help kind of break down histamine themselves, but none are nearly going to be as efficacious as actually taking this enzyme itself. So
I got two questions for you. So,
yeah.
so how long does it take for people before they see any kind of results from taking the DAO? And then second, what kind of recovery or better health are you seeing with people that
I
you
mean, I
talk
think for a lot of people, from anecdotally, I think it's really the digestive issues the most that people see. I think a lot of people who struggle with histamine kind of do struggle with a lot of digestive issues, the bloating, the bloating for no reason, the distension in the stomach. They struggle with foods, but they can't figure out what foods are causing the issues, right? And as a person who's been through this myself, like, you can make yourself crazy because you'll go and you get an allergy test done and they say, well, you don't have any allergies, right? And so you're like, well, I'm not allergic to this food, so it must be safe to eat. And yet you'll eat certain foods and you'll have all of these sort of digestive discomfort, maybe the body aches. I know some people report things like brain fog when they have a lot of high histamine, right? Their sleep is dysregulated. And so it's a lot of things that overlap with so many other potential issues you could be having. So it's an area that I think a lot of people really struggle with. And so that's why the feedback we get from people who have been struggling and have been in this bucket for a long period of time has been overwhelming. Just the response we get at how much it helps them just overall feel like their digestive system is running more popular, like, properly. And then it has that sort of trickle down effect with other areas in the body. The other area I would probably say is your skin reactions. For me personally, when I struggle with too much histamine, I break out in hives. I break out in hives for no apparent reason. You know, um, Everything that I've tried to do, there's no really rhyme or reason as to when I'm going to have these issues. It's definitely for me tied to my cycle and where my hormones are. Um, and then also, if I eat histamine rich foods at the same time, it's just one of those things that can be tough. And for me, often it just results in that random breakout of hives or just itchiness. And I know for a lot of people with histamine issues, that's a pretty common thing to experience. So
I feel like it's such a wide variety of symptoms linked to high histamine levels that it could easily get overlooked for an
yeah,
individual because it can be anywhere from allergy-like symptoms to like what you're talking about, skin hives and reactions to brain and nervous system, like you talked about earlier, and migraines,
yeah.
headaches, anxiety, panic feelings, brain fog, dizziness, and then even heart-related issues like rapid heart rate and heart palpitations that can be from high histamine levels.
Yeah, and a lot of times for women, when they start developing this, it's also at the onset of perimenopause. And so the hormone like fluctuations and the issues, the brain fog, and a lot of these things will almost immediately be attributed to, oh, well, you're 45 and you're 47, you're in perimenopause. It must be hormone related, and it is to some extent. I think just DAO is just a piece that has been overlooked in a lot of ways, which is why all that ongoing science that we're seeing, as early and emerging as it might be, it's really interesting just to see research in some of those fields so that maybe someday people will actually understand this link a little bit better. Um, but in the meantime, just having an enzyme, that our body already produces, the ability to take an external version of that enzyme to give your body more is just a really great option.
Well, you brought up a question for me, is that how do women, I don't know about men, but how do women know if it's a hormonal issue or if it's a histamine issue? I mean, I mean,
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. I can tell you my MCAS diagnosis took 8 years. It took them 8 years for me to get a diagnosis personally. And I struggled with all of these histamine related issues for years. And I, was tested for every different autoimmune disorder under the sun. And, I had all kinds of different blood work done. And if I wasn't actually like in an immune response, if I wasn't actually having sort of an outbreak, if you will, where I was dealing with, the mast cell dysregulation and producing histamine, and my blood work wouldn't necessarily show these things. And so for me personally, it took a long time for my team of OBGYN and kind of specialist doctors to even figure this out. I ended up going and paying for a genetic test to have certain genes tested that I was pretty sure I was going to have something come up, and I did, but I had to pay out of top pocket for that, of course, because it isn't covered by most medical insurance. So,
Well, this is huge because
yeah,
this could potentially help save people from struggling with this for 8 years down the line and
yeah.
hear this radio show of like, well, maybe that's my issue. And it's like a light bulb for them and hopefully will help save them from the
Yeah,
complications. And yeah,
and where I'm seeing the most kind of awareness coming into like to people who, I see customers come into stores and say, do you have DAO? And a lot of that knowledge is coming from the practitioner channel. I am seeing a lot of naturopaths and a lot of DOs and a lot of different sort of alternative practitioners that really have been keeping up with this research and kind of using it in their clinical practice. And so that's where sort of the early demand for this product was coming from. And so, I think that's a promising sign, right? That the research is kind of reaching some of the right people who might be able to help guide folks.
yeah, that's really good.
yeah, let me ask you this, because you stirred up my curiosity, but would it be better? I mean, this is hypothetical, but would it be better for somebody who had certain evidence of different symptoms and things like that to just go ahead and try some DAO?
Yeah, I mean, like I
And
said, it can't hurt. It doesn't have any, contraindications with any prescription medications. I know they've done some research in like adolescent age kids and children, so I know it's an enzyme, right? It's
right,
it's very safe, so there's no harm in it. You take it with your food, and just like any other enzyme that you would take alongside food, you take it right before you eat, and it puts that enzyme into your system so that it can help break down that histamine as it's hitting your gut and as your gut bacteria are producing histamine and such after you eat. So
I wonder if we're going to see more of the DAO enzymes implemented with digestive enzymes, or is that already a thing? That's it.
you could. I think the only hindrance I'm seeing right now is cost. Prior to us launching this product, as I mentioned, it just wasn't available as a raw material in the US for a long time. It was being made primarily in Switzerland and didn't have distribution in the US. And to find it online, it would be like $90 for a 30-day supply. And now that we're bringing it into the US and now that there's a supply here, the cost has come down. But it's definitely, a little bit more expensive than say some of these other enzymes out there, mostly because it is delicate, right? It has to be kind of produced right away and put into those enteric capsules and all of that. So
yeah, that's interesting. Well, it's not every day that we get to discuss things with the creator of the supplements. So I guess I'm curious, what is something that you're most excited other than the DAO that you guys are launching? Because we do really well with Better Being, which is the distributor
yeah,
of all of these products.
I mean, I'm so excited. We've recently launched a line of women's health products called Her Life Stages for women. We also then went ahead and launched a line of new men's products that have been really exciting.
We
And then
brought
the
those
other,
in. The
yeah,
libido, the testosterone.
testosterone.
Yep.
Yeah, and they aren't loaded with vitamins and minerals and amino acids. We kind of take the approach of most people are probably taking a multi already. I don't need to give them those ingredients. They are all clinically backed ingredients that are very specific to that area of focus. So we've really kind of tried to make it something that you could add into your everyday regimen alongside a multi, a probiotic, your omegas that you might be taking. And then the other big exciting area I think we're seeing right now is that sort of longevity space, that sort of healthy aging kind of category as we're seeing it. There's a lot of ingredients that are being researched right now for, mitochondrial function and cellular health and cellular energy as we age, and helping to maintain lean muscle mass as we age, helping to maintain your bone density as we age, and keeping your hormone levels healthy as we age. So there's a lot of really interesting research in that area. And I think creatine, has been huge for the last few years, and we're seeing a lot of just kind of cognitive and muscle related products kind of riding the wave of creatine's research, which is still ongoing. So there's a lot of interesting stuff. There's a lot of really great science being conducted right now. And so it'll be exciting to see where all of that goes in the next few years.
Yeah, that is one of the products, and I just want to give you props because if you're the creator, is that DHEA for men. Is it by Zhao or
Yeah, I mean, I've tried that one. It's
or
excellent.
is it Labs? Which one
The
is
Action Labs.
Action Labs?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's the DHEA, and we have
Yeah.
some, great testimonials on that, and a lot of men just rave about that product.
Yeah, I love DHEA. I know obviously any type of hormone product is something you need to consult a physician before you take, but you have pregnenolone, which is kind of like that your mother hormone, which produces DHEA, and it also produces cortisol. And a lot of people kind of don't think about that link between DHEA, which produces your testosterone, right, and cortisol. If you're super, super stressed out, your body is producing a lot of cortisol, which means it may not necessarily be producing as much DHEA as you would want it to be, right? It's kind of siphoning off that production towards cortisol production, right? And DHEA is a precursor to testosterone. So, there is a huge link between stress and not having enough DHEA, and in turn not having enough testosterone. And I think that piece gets overlooked quite a bit. So that's one of the reasons that I like DHEA, is that for people who seem to have a lot of stress, right?
And it's not just for men. Women can also benefit from
Absolutely.
DHEA.
And I know, clinically speaking, there are clinical studies specifically in females that showing that taking DHEA can help support healthy aging. So there is female specific clinicals for aging with DHEA, because women need testosterone too. Maybe not as much as men, but we certainly do need some testosterone, and those levels are declining, in our perimenopausal years, just like our estrogen and progesterone are. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
fascinating.
interesting.
And then I have one more question about your guys' heritage store castor oil. And
Yeah.
I guess I want you to let the listening audience know. I already think it's the best castor oil on the market, but from the expert of why that
Yeah.
one is superior.
We've been in the castor oil market with Heritage since the brand was founded back in like 1969. So I mean, it's fun when we see like the everything old is new again kind of cycle happen, because we've been selling, really high quality castor oil. A lot of it comes out of the Caribbean. Sometimes it can come out of India. We have organic options. It is just really a wonderful oil for hair. There's an active compound called ricinoic acid. I may have butchered that, but it's found in the castor bean, and it actually does have a lot of like research tied to that compound for hair. So it's been anecdotally, used traditionally all around the world in various places for hair, for thousands of years. So we have quite a few options. We also have the black castor, which comes out of the sort of, the Jamaica and Haiti and that part of the world. Just really wonderful for hair. We've done lash serums and eyebrow serums. I know a lot of people use it kind of for like face wash and doing oil cleansing for their skin. They put it on their lashes, their brows, their hair. They use it as scalp treatments, which is really wonderful to kind of stimulate the scalp. And we also see it quite a bit with the castor oil packs, which is why we sometimes also sell it with the wool flannel. And those castor oil packs, a lot of people use them to help with lymphatic support. They put them on the stomach area to warm the castor oil first, apply, the wool. Some people will just use saran wrap, and plastic wrap, and to really kind of help the oil penetrate, and using it to help stimulate lymphatic drainage. We see quite a bit. So if you go on places like TikTok, you'll see a lot of people kind of doing the before and after of what their belly looks like, right, when they apply the oil. So, there's just a lot of great uses for it. You can use it for massage. It's a little thick. It sometimes does better when you mix it with other like lighter carrier oils, if you will. You can use it to kind of put it on your hands and feet and any other dry areas. It's wonderful for skin. So I put it in my hair just about every day. So.
And you guys also have the internal capsules.
We do. Yeah, we have the internal capsules. We also have a couple of combinations. So we have one that has rosemary in it, which is done really well for scalp. We have a tea tree oil one. We've had one that has like ginger in it. I think there's a cayenne one. So
that's interesting.
Yeah, there's some different ones that we've had over the years, and as well as some different, skincare products that also have it, different topical products. So we use it quite a bit. It's kind of the base for a lot of our formulas throughout the brand.
Yeah, I use it almost every night. So I love the castor oil.
Yeah. I do too. The other one being the rose water spray too is the other sort of Heritage Store product we sell a ton of, is the rose water sprays, which is basically just when they create essential oil, they put lots and lots and lots and lots of rose petals into the water, and they extract the oil from the top. And the rose water is that leftover water. So it's kind of leftover. Yeah. And we also have a version that combines it with glycerin. And that's the one that people often use as like a makeup setting spray. Or they can use it in your hair too, because it helps to hydrate your hair when you add the glycerin. So
yeah, for the listening audience, we sell these little travel size, but I like to carry it around in my purse because it's refreshing, and there's a lot of benefits to misting and refreshing your aura, your face, and everything with rose water. So I think there's a lot of benefit.
Rose essential oil does have a lot of research on its sort of calming properties, if you will, and helping with relaxation. So just being able to mist it, I know people who like to mist their pillows and stuff when they go to sleep at night. You can put it in your hair. You can use it with makeup spray. You can use it to hydrate. So it is nice to just carry them around.
Yeah, well, awesome. Well, I want to personally thank you for all that you're doing and creating for Better Being products. That's pretty awesome that you are in charge of all of that. So are you there in the labs, or what do you just kind of create on the back?
Yeah, I have a wonderful team of formulary scientists whose job it is to take the things that we come up with and actually commercialize them into a product and to make them work on the machine. We have a wonderful group of analytical chemists and scientists who do all of the development of the testing methods and making sure that all of the testing gets done, and all of the certifications get done. We have a really great group in the manufacturing team that runs all of our equipment. So it is a large scale effort from a lot of people to see any new product from start to finish. So
That's exciting. But you get to do like, I think your job is the most fun because then you get to like come up with the concoction and tell them, okay, this is what we want to do.
And I get to see all the new science, right? So it's like, we get to read all the science about both of these, all of these different raw materials. And then we also get to see all the emerging science as it's coming out, which is really exciting, to see ingredients constantly having new clinical science, published in reputable journals. And so getting to constantly have access to all of that research is if you're into this area of focus and you're into research, that's probably the coolest part, I would say. Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah, that's you're definitely a well of knowledge.
Well, thank you. Yeah, thanks for having me on. It's always great to get to chat with folks out stores, selling the products and helping folks, directly. So yeah, thanks for having me on.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we only have about 3 minutes left. Is there anything left that you would like to mention to the listening audience?
Oh gosh, I'm not sure. Yeah, I mean, just as a whole, I think it's really interesting to see, how much attention I think supplements over the last, few years have really grown, especially like post-COVID, how many people tuning into the fact that they need to take more minerals, that they should be taking things like magnesium, and that a multivitamin just really helps to supplement those gaps that we might have in our diet that could long-term lead to a lot of different issues. It's just been really exciting to be able to kind of continuously launch new products as the interest has really swelled. And we've seen so much new science out there that, I'm really excited for what comes next with all of these kind of product launches. I think the science is getting better and better, and there's more of it every day. So it's been a fun journey.
I guess I do have one more question for you. You guys used to have a probiotic called Baby and Me Now. What happened to that? And are you guys formulating a new one? Because we've got a lot of people that want something like that.
Yeah, science changes over the years, and that collection was just a collection that we had. We had a whole lineup of like prenatal kind of products, but they were just an older generation of products. And so the plan is to eventually revamp the prenatal offering and some of those probiotic offerings. We don't currently have a children's probiotic really in Solarate either, and that's something that we know is on the docket. It's always like, which products do you choose when you already have about 900 or so in the brand? Which ones do you choose next? There's always, surprisingly, there's a never-ending amount of products in different categories we could be launching. So,
well, you can't forget about the babies. Yeah, they're tomorrow's future.
Yes. No, there's actually a lot of really amazing research that's popping up in children's microbiome area. There's some research that's been recently happening in the last several years, looking at children that are under 8 years old today and finding out that, especially in America and in the West, that they are missing entire strains of bacteria, particularly some of those bifidobacterium that are supposed to be the very first strains that we colonize as small children. And some of the research I've seen is like 1 in 4 kids are being born without some of these vital strains. So there's a lot of really incredibly interesting research for children and gut health that has been emerging. So,
well, we want to thank you so much for joining us today, and we will be on back on tomorrow morning.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, thank you guys so much.
You're listening to the Let's Stay Healthy radio show, sponsored and brought to you by Montana Harvest Natural Food Store in Billings, Montana.